Namaste, divine friends. This segment today, we're going to talk, solely about Ujjayi breath. The Ujjayi breath is really the foundation of a solid yoga practice. I'm assuming if you've gotten to this part in the series and you've been led to these talks, you have some basic understanding of Ujjayi breath. Typically, we learn in class that Ujjayi breath, you make a sound in the back of your throat when you inhale and exhale. And for the most part, that's correct. And that's where we start. When I started learning Ujjayi breath, many years ago, we learned it was Darth Vader breath. You sounded like Darth Vader in episodes 4 through 6 with a really deep guttural sound. They maybe talked about taking your glasses off and fogging your glasses and then making that sound through the nose. And back then, that was a great place to start. And we had a lot of classes where people were just making all sorts of loud, guttural noises with their breath and striving hard. And it's you have to start that way. I've tried to teach classes where we didn't start that way, and it didn't work because yoga is a process of going from the gross to the subtle. And as you start with that gross sound and the gross breath, you start developing the habit of making noise, get over the fear of making odd noises in class, and you start, really connecting to the breath. But after a while, you need to find a way to soften, to deepen the Ujjayi breath. But for the most part, there really isn't much of a motivation for finding a deeper, softer breath. As that Darth Vader breath works well for almost all the cases. If you've caught the last Star Wars 7 through 9, you see that Darth Vader himself has softened his breath up. It's not that deep sound in 4 through 6, 7 through 9. It's a little bit softer, a little bit kinder, a little bit more sadness to his breath there. And that's kind of phase 2. We're going to go for phase 3. We're going to go all the way with this today. And we see that our motivation, if you just saw this is our, 5th class in the series. If you attended the last class and tried to do the standing vinyasa krama class with a 10 or 11 second inhale and a 10 or 11 second exhale, about 3 breaths per minute, you find out that, you start running out of breath. You find that you really need to find that subtle inhale and that subtle exhale just in order to maintain that breathing rate. And I've delayed this pranayama class until after we did that really slow breathing, just to really highlight the need for it. Without a motivation for doing the subtle breath, it's really hard to find it. And I've also found that when I'm teaching Ujjayi, I really wait until the students are tired, are worn out, because if you're really feeling gung-ho and energetic, it's really hard to find that soft, subtle breathing that is really necessary for this. So that's what it isn't. So what are we looking for with the Ujjayi breath? What are we trying to do? Well, let's back up a little bit, and you understand that Ujjayi breath has a physical component to it, and it has an energetic component to it. First, the energetic component is as you're making that sound in the throat, right by the vocal cords, ahead of the second chakra, there's a subtle energy channel that runs directly from the heart to the head, right from the astral body in the head to the causal body in the heart. There's a direct, very not well talked about, but direct, very strong pranic channel between those two. And in the very first session, we talked about how yoga is an understanding of how to control and manipulate and use the prana in the body. And so the Ujjayi breath, from an energetic perspective, is using that energy channel, strengthening that energy channel that we have between the mind and the heart. It really enhances the heart-head connection. And that becomes critical as we get into deeper pranayama, deeper asana practices. So there's a very definite but clear, subtle energy that we're activating through this asana practice. From a physical perspective, what we're trying to do is just control the breath, control the length and duration of our breathing. And we do that, the belly itself through the diaphragm controls, really is the pump that controls, that pushes the breath in and out. But it's a very large, very gross pump, and if we're trying to control the breath at a very fine rate, we need some good way of controlling that feedback. And so what we do physically is by hearing that sound, we know we can equate that sound to our breathing rate, and not just the rate, but the energy associated with that breath. And so we use that sound as just feedback. If we start catching our breath, if we start breathing too loud or too short, it's really that sound of our breath that's going to cue us more than, oh, my navel's in, the breath is all gone. It's really going to cut off the sound before we get the deeper, grosser indications that our belly's distended or the belly's pulled back. So those are the two main things we look for in Ujjayi, but we need to go a little bit deeper. And that's what we're here today for, is to go deeper. And one of the best ways to really find that breath is to understand that the Ujjayi breath has to come from the heart. You've seen singers singers are really wonderful singers that just sing from the heart. They're just glorious, heartfelt songs. And the Ujjayi needs to be a heartfelt song, partially because of the connection between the astral and causal bodies, and partially from the effect of the heart on all of our bodies, because our heart is our deeper true self. And by finding that heart connection, we can get there. And what I like to do is I have Urpal here to help with our Ujjayi breath. And I do a thing I call teddy bear breath. And to do that, we will start off by just firing up a normal Ujjayi breath. Just take a long inhale and make some sound through the throat. Take a long exhale and sound through the throat. Typically it's a sound, a pretty gross, pretty vigorous sound. Do a couple more. And then what's nice to do is grab Urpal, your favorite teddy bear, whether real or imagined, or maybe your favorite child, either real or imagined. Take that and hold them near the heart. Feel a loving connection to whatever your object of attention is. Feel it really deeply in the heart for a few seconds. Feel that energy in the heart. Soften everything. And then do exactly the same thing. A nice, slow, soft Ujjayi breath. Inhale and exhale. And just do 2 breaths, holding your teddy bear near to you. And 1 more. See for yourself how making the Ujjayi breath a loving connection to your inner heart center changes the breath. It doesn't translate incredibly well, through the internet. But for those that are teachers out there, try this experiment with your classes. It's amazing to do this. You have 5, 10, 15, 20 people doing the Ujjayi breath. Have them find their heart center. Have them find their teddy bear. Have them hold their heart. Hold there for a few seconds. And then just tell them to do the same Ujjayi breath from the heart. It's really incredible feeling how the sound changes, how the whole energy of the room changes, how the whole energy of the practice changes. That is really the main key of Ujjayi, is finding that energy through the heart and seeing how that changes the sound. Once we get that sound done, once we get that heart-centered connection going, the next step is to really refine the sound. And it's really hard to describe, except it's a sweet, loving song of the heart is really the best way to describe that sound. I first heard it during a silent meditation class out in California. I was sitting next to Ben, and Ben just had this beautiful sound of breath. And the immediate I heard that, I was like, aha, that is the breath. That is a breath that I've been searching for. And once you hear it, once you find it, you know that that's the breath. And it's not going to transmit through here. That's why learning directly from a teacher that has seen it, that knows it, is so important. But we'll do our best. And it's just hold that thought that it's a song of the heart. It's a subtle, very soft, very yet divine sound that we're searching for. One of the keys to finding that, it's a standard one. I've learned this, maybe 20 years ago, that you can visualize you have gills. Go on either side of your throat and just touch lightly on either side of the throat. Imagine that you have gills there. Imagine that that's where the breath is coming in and coming out of. So don't envision you're breathing through the nose, even though you are. Definitely keep the lips closed. But breathe and feel the energy through those gills as you inhale from there. Feel the breath coming in there and exhale. Feel the breath coming out of there. I learned that in a Rodney Yee workshop in about 2002. He introduced that, was the first I'd heard of that. And it stuck with me, and it took maybe 6 or 7 years after that for it to make sense to me. I heard that, and it made no sense. I tried to breathe there, and it just wasn't there. Then all of a sudden one day during my practice, I was probably tired and worn out and near the end. Suddenly I was like, oh, those are the gills that he was talking about. So by just keeping this in mind, seeing if you can find that, you can't force it, but just keep it in the mind. See if you can breathe through the gills. See if you can breathe from the heart. See if you can make a long, smooth, sweet sound. Our last class, we did about a 11 or 12 second breath and sustained that for almost a half hour. That's the breath we're looking for. And if you can find that breath and use that for all of your asana practices, that's our goal here. The third piece is the belly, is the prana, because yoga always comes back to prana. And we've been emphasizing through this whole series that the breath has to be driven from the belly. Technically, it's driven from the bladder right in front of the second chakra. As you inhale, you distend the belly, hopefully distending the belly enough that you feel the pelvic floor drop. As you exhale, you pull that belly in, hopefully pull it in all enough that you can almost feel a void out in through that bottom of the bladder, through the second chakra. And so that becomes your whole pump. And as the goal of that pump is to really move the prana up and down through the second of our main energy channels, our second main nadi. The first one is the heart head chakra, or heart head nadi. The second one is the energy channel, the Sushumna, up the center of the spine. Those are the two main places we push prana during our practice. And during our breath, when we're doing the belly breathing, as we exhale and push that belly in, we are actually taking the prana down through the Sushumna, down to the bottom chakra. As we inhale and the belly distends, the energy rises up through that Sushumna, up through the sixth chakra on the back of the head. And so that's why I never explained that. But as we're breathing, the inhales are always up, even though the air is going down. The exhales are always down, even though the air is coming up, because the prana works diametrically opposed to the physical breath. It's easy to think about that as saying, oh, as I'm pushing the breath out with the belly going down, the breath is going out, it's being refilled with the prana going down. As you inhale, the belly goes down, the breath goes up. So they're working in opposite directions. So the belly is not only a pump for the breath in and out, the belly is also a pump for the prana going up and down. So you push the belly in, the prana comes down. You pull the belly out, the prana goes up. And so the belly is pumping the prana up through the Sushumna in the center of the spine and really energizing the whole body. And the prana going through the Sushumna oxygenates the whole blood with the Ujjayi breath, which is what allows us to run an asana practice at a slow breathing rate and also at a very slow pulse rate. You can keep your pulse down, you keep your breath rate down while you're still doing your asana practice because you're being sustained from the prana from the practice. So that is why we're pushing it. Technically, actually, if we want to get a little more technical, when you're inhaling, it's actually the apana, because the prana actually has 5 elements to it. The prana has the prana, the udana, the vyana, the prana, and the samana. There's actually 5 different divisions of prana. And as you inhale, it's the apana that goes up through the spine. And as you exhale, it's a prana that goes back down through the spine. So we're moving prana and apana. And when you get the prana and apana to merge and stop and meet in the middle, that's where you get the breath to stop and you can achieve the breathless state, which is ultimately where we're going with this. Keep slowing the breath down. The Yoga Sutras, you go into, if many of you have copies of the Yoga Sutras verse 250 talks about the breath and says that the Ujjayi breath is controlled. I'll pull it up here just to get it correct. Prana is controlled by, regulated by space, time, and number. And so that's what we've been doing, through a whole vinyasa krama. We've been controlling the time, duration, and the number of breaths very accurately because time and number is key. Also, controlling the space is important, as we'll get more into it. But space, you have the internal space, the space of where are you moving your belly, and you also want to keep the chest still, because if you're moving prana up and down through the spinal column, you don't want to be moving your spinal column because the energy then can't flow through the straight and narrow up to the land of milk and honey, which was trying to do is get that prana to flow up into the higher chakras from the lower energy centers as we raise that energy up. Yeah, Sutra 250 also says the breath can be prolonged and subtle, indicating that, yeah, our goal of our pranayama, our Ujjayi breath, is to be both prolonged, really draw out the breath. A minimum 6-second breath with a 3-second pause becomes, yeah, a baseline for our breath. And it needs to be subtle. Eventually, you want the Ujjayi breath to be almost imperceptible, so you can barely hear it. It becomes just the background of the breath. And you definitely want it so when you get it ultimately subtle, anybody sitting next to you can't even hear it. But you can't start with subtle. I've tried getting students to start, really good students, to start with the subtle, and they just don't get it because you can't start subtle because you have to start with loud and then ease it down, just like our asana practice. It's very hard to start with a very subtle asana practice. We have to start with a vigorous practice. We have to start, yeah, a lot of times with the heat, with the energy, with the very physical strength, because it's through that physical strength that we find our subtlety. The third part of the Sutra 250 talks about the breath being external, internal, and suspended. We have to have the external breath, the physical breath being external, but also the internal breath, the movement of the prana through the sushumna is our internal breathing. And then also suspended. All the Ujjayi breath, you have to have that suspension. We've been emphasizing the pause. And recall that it's an inhale and pause. It's not an inhale and a hold, a grip. It's just a pause. You inhale till you run out of breath, and then you wait until it's time to exhale. So the inhale is just a single effort. You just inhale, and you stop inhaling, it's a pause. So it just one flows into another, and then the exhale becomes a conscious exhale, counting as time and number and duration, with the space being creating the internal space, the space also being the external space. How far does your breath go? Ultimately, your Ujjayi breath will not go far. One good measure of your breath is you get a finger, put your finger under your nose, and do normal breathing. With normal breathing through the nose, your finger there, you can feel the breath. You can feel the air on that finger quite dramatically. And then fire up your Ujjayi breath. And put your finger under your nose while you're doing a soft, subtle, long, loving Ujjayi breath. One of the marks of a very good Ujjayi breath is even your finger under your nose, you get no discernible movement of breath outside the nostrils. That's your internal breathing. Of course, if you were to hold the nose and external and do the Ujjayi, yeah, you would not be able to do it because there is external breath coming out. But it's so subtle coming out once you've mastered Ujjayi that you can't feel it. And that becomes your marker that you are on the way of getting really a mastered Ujjayi breath. So to wrap up, Ujjayi breath is characterized by a very loving, smooth, subtle, sweet sound from the heart that you pick up in the ears. By getting that sound, you can really get a long duration. You get a nice, subtle sound coming out from the throat. Maybe you can find that trick where it feels like it's coming from the gills and the throat, but the upper chest is open and stationary. the bladder, lower chakra areas are pushing that prana up and down through the sushumna in the spine, and the vibration that's coming in the throat becomes really a pranic vibration. It's no longer an aspirated sound, that the aspiration of the air going past the vocal cords is creating that sound. It's really an energetic vibration from the energy from the hard head centers, creating that vibration where the center point of that second energy channel is right in the thyroid, in the vocal cords, creating that vibratory sound. So this takes some practice. We'll do a pranayama class in our next session, so we get to work on this. But really the best way to work on the Ujjayi breath is while you're doing the vinyasa krama. That's why we introduced it first. You get the vinyasa krama practice. It becomes a wonderful physical exercise for opening up the energy. It becomes a great energy exercise for learning to manipulate the prana. But also, while you're doing that, it becomes a 20-minute, half-hour daily practice of trying to find that subtle breath. See if you can find that subtle sound, that sweet sound, while you're working out, while you're getting your exercise. And find that as you get fatigued, it might become easier to find it. You get to the point where you're just like, okay, I surrender. It's not going to be there. I'm not going to find it. And see that, yeah, once you give up, once you surrender to the practice, surrender completely to the heart, then the practice starts. Then it all arises on up. So with that, happy breathing. We have to breathe anyways. May as well breathe pranayama. May as well move while we're breathing. Enjoy the Ujjayi breath. Hope you find this useful in your daily practice, in your daily life. Thank you so much for your attention. Urpal and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.